Next up, I have the Canadian mushroom growers, and that is Mr. Medeiros, I hope I'm saying that right, and Mr. Koeslag. You have up to 5 minutes for remarks. Over to you. The floor is yours.
Perfect. Thank you very much for this opportunity to address the committee and talk about the amazing mushroom industry in Canada, our issues relating to the horticulture sector. My name is Ryan Koeslag, and I'm the Executive Vice President of the Canadian Mushroom Growers Association, and I'll be sharing my time with our President, Mike Medeiros, who is also a farmer. We currently have a workforce of nearly 7,500 people, from farm owners, substrate makers, to mushroom pickers. Those 7,500 people have produced the over 150,000 tons of mushrooms each year, year-round. Our growers supply nearly 100% of the fresh mushrooms in grocery stores across Canada. 40 years ago, mushroom farmers grew 1 pound of mushrooms on 1 square foot of growing space, and now in 2024, they grow nearly 6 pounds on that same space, and that's a 500% increase. Canada exports approximately 40% of our production to the United States. Every day, our mushroom farmers are expected to compete with our neighbors to the south, who continually have less government cost pressures. We're here today to talk about 2 bad policies imposed by our federal government, the carbon tax and the removal of the temporary foreign worker housing waiver. Currently, Canadians comprise 70% of our workforce, and for decades, our mushroom farms have advertised and looked for Canadians to fill all our positions. They've conducted hundreds of labor market impact assessments, all showing the need for temporary foreign workers. I say the word temporarily only because that's the name of the program. Many agriculture groups, including the Canadian Agriculture Human Resource Council, indicate huge job vacancies in agriculture, signaling will always require foreign workers, just like many other developed nations around the world. For a long time now, when a worker requests to move out of the farmer-provided housing while still under the temporary foreign worker program, Service Canada has accepted a housing waiver, allowing workers to move in with family members, spouses, children, friends, or simply have their own independence. Farms have allowed for contingencies for situations when workers may need to return to the employer housing, having identified hotels, setting aside housing, or other arrangements. However, since Service Canada has arbitrarily stopped accepting the housing waivers when the workers choose to live on their own, they will be punishing farmers by demanding the farmers keep empty housing for those workers who have moved out. In some situations, workers moved out years ago, having made families of their own, and our farms are reporting that it's extremely rare to have workers request to return to the employer housing. The farmers' cost to this policy change will be enormous. This impacts all the year-round employers, such as mushrooms, pork, cattle, poultry, dairy, and greenhouses, who use the temporary foreign worker agricultural stream. We're talking about hundreds of empty houses, or hundreds of empty rooms, hundreds of empty beds for people who may never use them. We have an industry-wide survey out right now, and with our preliminary data indicating the need for up to 1,000 empty houses. Now I'll pass it to our President, Mike Medeiros, to talk about the carbon tax.
Thank you for the opportunity to talk here. The carbon tax is yet another item that challenges the viability of the mushroom farm, including mine as well. Mushrooms are already one of the most efficient water users, have one of the lowest carbon footprints, and mushrooms are grown on recycled agriculture material. Yet the carbon tax will cost mushroom farms an additional $7.2 million this year alone. On our farm, we are paying over $16,000 per month in carbon tax, and with the new 23% increase, that will go up to just under $20,000 for our heating bill for our farm. My farm and other mushroom farms export about 40% of the mushrooms we grow to the U.S., and this also makes it very difficult for us to compete on that level. I as well drive an electric vehicle, so I do believe in issues with the climate change. Back in 2018, we invested $1.8 million into a pipeline to bring natural gas to our farm, which is a cleaner fuel source, which cut down our propane usage by roughly 700,000 liters per year. A year later, the carbon tax was implemented, so any savings I was hoping to help pay for my pipeline was sort of gobbled up with my carbon tax. Also, I'm building a compost facility nearby in the Prescott area, which will have the lowest carbon footprint in the world to be making mushroom compost. But yet my tax continues to increase. At the end of the day, the data is showing that the carbon tax will not reduce emissions from mushrooms, as they already have the most advanced technology and there are no alternative options at the moment. We are trying to work with the Canadian Revenue Agency to be included in the greenhouse rebate program because mushrooms were left out. Despite mushrooms being under the same export pressure and having the same growing conditions, we are not able to apply for that rebate. We are also supportive of the unamended bill C-234 and look for ways for this committee to help our farmers to remain viable.
P2 plastics ban that the NDP Liberal government has tried to implement. And I've heard from the organics folks today that you actually grow 25% of your organics, I believe was the figure you gave today, is in fruits and vegetables. And from the mushroom growers as well, you're exporting 40% of the mushrooms grown in Canada. So I'm just curious, perhaps we'll start with the mushroom growers. How does the P2 plastics ban, how is that going to affect mushroom growers? Because we know that mushrooms do come in packaging that's plastic right now, and you're exporting to other countries. So could you give us an idea of how that might affect you?
So we are using recyclable PET already, which is allowed after that ban. Plus, we also are looking at cardboard as a substitute. So we are doing trials right now to utilize cardboard for our tills. Years ago, actually, all our packaging was cardboard, but then as consumers asked for smaller packaging, that's when we transitioned into the recyclable PET. But we are looking at also trying to implement the cardboard, so we are doing tests for that. But right now, with margins the way they are, they're sort of non-existent in our industry at the moment. So it's really tough to implement these extra costs on the cardboard. Because the retailers do not want to pay more for mushrooms, and the consumers, I believe the price of mushrooms in the stores right now, the consumers are at their, I guess that's all they want to pay for it, because at the moment we've noticed consumption going down about 10 to 15%. So we don't want prices to increase. So we've been absorbing the food inflation at the moment. But we are working on changing to cardboard.
Thank you. And you mentioned that consumption's already down, and we've heard from a Deloitte report that by banning plastics right now, it could increase healthcare costs by over $1 billion per year because of lower fresh produce consumption. So did the CFA have any input into what was published in the planning notice, or were you only afforded the 30 days window for consultation after the fact?
So we didn't get a lot of heads up on that announcement. Certainly, we've been working very closely with the Canadian Produce CPMA on this issue, really trying to figure out what the problem is we're trying to solve here, because the amount of plastic we're talking about is so small, yet the impact is so huge. And really what it means is it's going to be a lot of waste product. It's going to be a lot of potentially not having imports coming in because the importers won't adhere to the plastic regulation. So really all we ask for in any issue is let's have the conversation to see what the impact on the ground is so that we can go forward collectively and make the right decision. So. Thank you.
Now to the mushroom growers, you mentioned that you paid $16,000 per month in carbon tax, and that the mushroom farming industry pays $7.2 million. And we've heard the NDP Liberal government claim that you get more back in rebates than you spend. So I'm just wondering, is that your experience? And have you heard from anyone who's gotten more back, or do you believe they're spreading a false narrative by making this claim?
Well, I know from my farm and other farms I've talked to, we don't get any carbon tax back whatsoever. We just basically keep paying it, and we don't see anything for it. We're not getting any credits for the work that we're already doing for carbon sequestration. So it's sort of a little frustrating on that point.
Mr. Curry, have you heard of anybody getting more money back than what they're paying for carbon tax?
No, not at this point. And we have to understand that agriculture producers are large users of all products, all inputs, including energy. So when we use a lot, especially when we live in a northern climate where we require a lot of heat, large volumes of propane and natural gas in particular are used. So I don't think the government has any intention of rebating the amount of carbon tax that we're paying, much to what Mr. Medeiros just alluded to.
Repeat what some of the concerns are in the mushroom side in relation to, I think what I'm hearing is an underutilization of the housing in relation to temporary farm worker programs.
Yeah, and thanks very much for the question. And I'll also point out that the mushroom industry is all organic. We either are organic or we're certified organic. So we're an industry who's actually always been around with organic beliefs, and certainly we feel as though we're an industry that could use more support. And we've had recommendations on the Timber Foreign Worker Program. Our issue right now is essentially there has been a fundamental change in the program. There's always been a housing waiver allowance for those individuals who wanted to go and find their own housing, live with their spouse, live with their family members. And so now there's been a fundamental shift and change in policy arbitrarily that now even if a worker chooses to live on their own, farmers must provide an empty space at all times. So that means we need to find empty beds, empty houses, empty apartments, just so that we can continue to be approved under the Timber Foreign Worker Program. So we mentioned about needing to provide more stability. That is a huge instability for our labor issues in trying to harvest organic mushrooms.
Okay, so I understand. So notwithstanding the existing policy that was where foreign workers could basically have a waiver to say, I'm going to live in a different situation, but thank you for the opportunity if I needed it. Now it has to always be an open unit. Okay, I can appreciate the...
Mr. Koeslag, when you were talking about the empty house policy, and we know that the government's new empty house policy will require farmers to keep, and in some cases even buy vacant homes, even if employees choose to live on their own, has there been an analysis of how many empty houses farmers will be forced to keep or buy across Canada?
Yeah, so we're doing our own survey, and as of right now, we're into the thousands. And certainly, like I had mentioned, this applies to mushrooms, dairy, pork. Anybody who is keeping timber foreign workers year-round under the agriculture stream, they'll be impacted by this. So, yeah, it's a huge issue that we're going to have to be having vacant houses, vacant spaces during a housing crisis across this country in the rural communities for which these farms operate.
And do you think that this policy could actually lead to a decrease in workers on farms?
I guess like in the sense of, this could increase costs for the farms. Certainly there is going to be an impact when it comes back to the entire viability of these operations, which is what we were trying to stress, that every time that there's a new regulation or a new policy from government, it really has our farms contemplating the viability of how they're going to be able to continue. And this is just one of those major changes where, certainly it's going to have a huge impact.
Thank you very much. Mr. Curry, I'm hearing a massive amount of outrage from farmers, not just in Ontario and my own riding of Lambton, Kent, Middlesex, but actually across the country in recent weeks about the government's announced changes to the capital gains tax. I'm just wondering, has your association assessed the impact that such an increase will have on the viability of farm transfers, and what have you been hearing from those that you represent?
Well, we're certainly, like you, hearing a lot of questions, and we are looking into it right now. We haven't done a full assessment on what the total impact will be, but certainly, what does that mean for transition, succession planning? That's the biggest concern that we're seeing with this announcement. Is it going to affect that succession planning aspect going forward? And that's really what we're concerned about. And I'll just end it by saying something that was triggered when MP Taylor Day was speaking about the preservation of farmland, and whether it's tax credits or whether it's any policies that are made. If you can't save the farmer, what are you saving the farmland for? So that's something that this committee needs to think about, making recommendations going forward. Is you can do all you want to save the farmland, but if you can't save the farmer, what's the purpose? And so making sure that our tax system is where it needs to be, make sure our environmental policies are strong where they need to be. That's what we need to keep in mind.
And I am concerned with the approach that the program's branch is taking with climate. To simply explain it, the focus at that level is, what can farmers do to improve the climate, as opposed to protecting farmers from what is happening in the environment.